All right, everyone. So our last video for Module 4B, which talks about knowledge representation, is going to be this video. And in this particular video, we're going to discuss the theory of semantic activation. Okay, so this was an idea that was proposed initially by Collins and Killian in 1969. And basically the question that Collins and Killian were trying to answer is how are categories represented, how are categories and concepts rather represented in the mind? And the first thing to note about this particular theory is that it posits a hierarchical categorization, right? So what this means is at the very top, we again have the most general or global level. So we might imagine if we're dealing with non-man-made objects, the most general level might be living things. And then we can more specifically distinguish among living things that are plant or animal. And then we can talk about specific plants such as trees or flowers, or specific animals such as bird or fish. And then at the most specific level, we can distinguish between different species of trees and species of fish in blue there, right? So the first thing to notice is the hierarchical organization. And the next thing to note is what each of these structures represent. So in general, Collins and Killian posit that the network is going to consist of nodes that are connected by links. So each node is going to represent a category or concept, and concepts are placed in the network so that related concepts are connected. Okay, so related concepts are going to be connected, just like a tree and a flower are examples of plants, so they're going to be connected. Okay, and they're also connected in such a way so not only is each node going to represent a category or concept, and concepts are going to be placed in the network so that related concepts are connected. In addition, properties associated with each concept are going to be indicated by nodes. Okay. So for example, properties of trees might be that they're big relative to other objects. They have branches. For example, they have bark, which is the substance that the trees are made of, right? So all of the nodes are connected according to their specific properties, okay? Okay, so one of the specific predictions of the semantic activation model was tested using that same semantic verification or sentence verification technique, right? So one of the basic predictions of this model is that everything is connected via nodes and links, right? So things that are closest to each other in this network should be quickest as far as categorization judgments, right? So the model predicts that when using this sentence verification technique, in which participants are asked to answer yes or no statements about concepts, okay, they should be slower to answer yes or no to the question, a canary is an animal, than to the question or to the sentence, a canary is a bird, right? So it should take them more time to verify the sentence, a canary is an animal, than the sentence, a canary is a bird, right? Because there's more of, they have to go higher up in the hierarchy, to answer a canary is an animal, then a canary is a bird, right? So another way to say that is that the node for canary is closer to the node for bird than it is to the node for a canary is an animal, right? So if mentally, when making that categorization judgment, people are traveling within the network, right, it should take more time to get all the way up to the animal node from canary than to the bird node from canary, right? So there's more levels to be mentally traversed for a canary is an animal than a canary is a bird. So when Collins and Killian measured reaction time, so they measured how long it took people to say yes or no for each of these sentences, okay? It was true that there were much longer reaction times for a canary is an animal than for either a canary is a canary, which would require no travel, right? Than for a canary is an animal, okay? So it was about 1100 milliseconds to verify that a canary is a canary, about 1200 milliseconds to verify a canary is a bird, and about maybe 1250 or so, 1225 seconds to verify a canary is an animal, right? So it seems like, again, what's happening is participants are sort of mentally traversing through this network in real time, and the further up, the more levels they have to traverse in this network, the longer it's going to take them to verify whether the sentence is true or not, right? So before, in the red line, right, we were talking about different categories, right? Categories of living things. A canary is a cat, is a canary is the most specific level. A canary is a bird, is the next level, and a canary is an animal is the next level of category. But the same is true of properties, right? So the properties listed under canary are a canary is yellow and a canary can sing, right? So you don't really have to move very far from that canary module to answer the question a canary can sing, right? And that makes sense that you would see the lowest reaction time there of about 1300 seconds, right? You have to move up one node to the bird node to get the associated properties there, right? So the associated properties of a bird are that birds can fly, birds have feathers, etc., right? So because the property can fly requires going up one more level, right? It's going to take slightly longer, so it's going to take 1400 milliseconds. And finally, a canary has skin. You have to traverse all the way up to the category level of animal to answer that question, so it's going to take the most time, right? So again, according to this theory of categorization, you're traveling in real time through this semantic network that has a hierarchical structure, and each level of categorization is going to have specific properties associated with it, okay? And you're going to start at the most specific level and travel up to get to the more general levels. So obviously, the more nodes you have to travel through, the longer it's going to take you. Okay. So this notion of spreading activation, or another property of this theory of semantic activation, is that as you are traveling through the nodes, right? So for example, as you are going from the robin node to the bird node, what's happening is obviously all of the properties of robins and birds are going to get activated, right, as you are focusing on those. But also the associated nodes are going to become activated as well, right? So even though you're just thinking about robins, right, when you activate that node of bird, that activation is going to spread from robin to canary and ostrich, right? So activation is spread through the network, right? As a person searches from robin to bird, those nodes get activated, but that activation is going to spread to other nodules in the bird category, or other nodes in the bird category, okay? So again, another property of the theory, which leads to further predictions, is this idea of spreading activation. So spreading activation is activity that spreads out along any link that is connected to an activated node, right? So for example, moving through the network from robin to bird activates the node at the bird level, and the link that we use to get from robin to bird is indicated, right, by the blue arrow. But according to the idea of spreading activation, this activation is also going to spread to other nodes in the network, okay? And that's indicated by the dotted lines there, okay? Therefore, if you activate a canary, okay, if you activate the canary to bird pathway, okay, additional concepts that are connected to bird, such as animal and other types of birds, are also going to become activated, okay? Okay, so the result of this is that additional concepts that receive this activation become primed so that they're retrieved more easily from memory. Okay, and how do we know that? So how do we know that this idea of spreading activation is correct? Okay, and that not only is it going to now be easier for you to think of robin, but also canary and ostrich, right? Well, we know that because of experiments like this one. So in this particular experiment, what Meyer and colleagues did is they used something called a lexical decision task. So in this particular task, they presented participants with two types of words, okay? So the participants' task, upon seeing these types or these two types of words, was to indicate as soon as possible whether they were words or not, right? So you'll notice some of the stimuli they were given consisted of actual words. So for example, chair, money, bread, wheat, etc. But some of the other stimuli they were given consisted of non-words, okay? So what they had to do in this case was they had to indicate as quickly as possible whether the items that they were given were words or not, okay? So if they saw funt and glurb, they would obviously say, no, these are not words, where if they saw chair or chair and money, they would say, yes, these are words, okay? So what they looked at in this experiment is they looked at, again, how quickly they could say whether they were words or non-words was the dependent variable. But they also looked at whether the word pairs were closely associated or not, right? So for example, bread and wheat, we would expect, because those items are associated with each other in the semantic network, right? We would imagine that there is a bread node, and directly underneath that bread node are different types of bread. So for example, white and wheat, okay? Whereas other word pairs were weakly associated, right? So for example, chair would be listed under the furniture node, whereas money would be under an entirely different node, right? So the idea is that if spreading activation is true, right, if that theory is correct, then activating the bread node, okay, should also activate related nodes, such as different types of bread, so white and wheat, for example, whereas we wouldn't expect the activation to spread from totally disparate words like chair and money, right? And so what they found when they looked at reaction time in milliseconds is that in cases where the words were not associated with each other, so they were not next to each other in the network, and therefore would not benefit from spreading activation, the reaction time was around 950 milliseconds, whereas when the words were associated in terms of meaning and they were in close proximity to each other in the semantic network, the reaction time was around 850 seconds, right? So what that supports is this notion of spreading activation, that when we think of a particular item in the network, not only does that particular item or that particular node become activated, but also things that are associated, right? So for example, bread is connected to the node for types of bread, which is white and wheat. And bread might also be connected to other bakery items like cake and so forth, right? Whereas because chair and money are from totally different categories, we wouldn't expect them to be in close proximity in the network, right? And therefore, activating chair should in no way activate the concept of money. Okay? All right. So that concludes my final video for Module 4B, which talks about knowledge representation. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, and I will see you in my next video. So my apologies, I actually had one more slide here where I wanted to talk about some of the limitations of the semantic activation model. So one of the limitations of the semantic activation model is that it can't explain some of the results that we talked about in the previous videos, right? So for example, both the prototype theory of categorization or approach to categorization and the exemplar theory of categorization talk about something called the typicality effect, right? So the typicality effect is simply the notion that members of a category that are more frequently encountered or more typical of that category are going to be categorized more quickly than less typical members of that category. So for example, the classic demonstration of the typicality effect is that people are faster in terms of their reaction time to say that a sparrow is a bird or a robin is a bird than they are to say an ostrich is a bird, right? And again, the notion is that we encounter sparrows and birds more often, and they're more similar to our prototypical bird, and so that would be our statistical average of a bird. And they're also more similar to the common exemplars that we see of birds, right? So they have more typical features of birds than ostriches, right? Ostriches don't fly, and flying is kind of a characteristic feature of birds, right? So that's the typicality effect. And unfortunately, the semantic activation model, or Collins and Killian's model, doesn't really explain that very well. So again, according to the semantic activation model, we should be fastest at categorization when the new object that we're trying to categorize is closest to a particular node, right? So for example, we've shown, or Collins and Killian showed, that people are faster to say a canary is a bird than a canary is an animal, right? Because those nodes are closer together, right? So canary is closer to bird than it is to animal, right? But as you guys will see from looking at this diagram, right, the semantic activation model would actually predict the same reaction time for statements like a canary is a bird than an ostrich is a bird, right? So you actually can't see that on this particular diagram, but you might imagine if you look at the slide from a few slides back, right? Remember the way that items are represented in the semantic network is we have birds, and then directly linked off of the bird node are examples of birds, right? So we have bird canary, bird ostrich, bird sparrow, etc. Right? So in terms of where those nodes are located in the network, they are equidistant to each other, right? So imagine, so this theory of the semantic activation model imagines that we're in real time traveling through this network. So if the nodes are the same distance away, then the reaction time should be the same, right? But they're not. People are much faster to say a canary is a bird than an ostrich is a bird, right? So this particular model doesn't explain that very well. And there's even some contradictory results, right? So remember, the critical assumption of the semantic activation model is that the more you have to travel in the network to answer the question, right, the longer it's going to take you, right? So this model would predict that it's going to take us longer to say yes or no to the statement a pig is an animal than a pig is a mammal, right? Because going from pig to animal is a distance of about 2 nodes, whereas going from pig to mammal is a distance of only 1 node, right? So because we have to travel or traverse more levels, the model would predict that we would be faster at saying a pig is a mammal than a pig is an animal. But it turns out the opposite is true. So people are actually faster to say a pig is an animal than a pig is a mammal, even though it involves more mental travel, so to speak, or you have to jump from pig to mammal and then from mammal to animal rather than simply jumping from pig to mammal, right? So that is a result that contradicts the particular theory of this, or the particular predictions of this model, is that people are actually faster when they have to travel all the way from pig to animal than if they only have to travel from a pig to a mammal, right? So that seems to violate a critical prediction of this theory. Okay? All right, so that concludes this video for real. And if you guys have any questions, I know this is probably one of the more complex modules that we've covered. So certainly if you guys have any questions or you want to schedule a Zoom session with me to go over some of these results together, I would be very happy to do that. Okay? All right, so have a great day, and I will see you in my next video.